Hi, I'm Clara. Welcome to the Practice with Clara podcast, where we dive into philosophy and all things yoga related, which has been my passion for the last 20 years. In today's episode, we go into the Bhagavad Gita, one of my favorite stories. A couple of the themes we touch on is action for action's sake, devotion, and what is fate. We hope you enjoy today's episode, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to the Practice with Clara podcast. You're sitting with Stephanie.
I'm Clara.
Today for our theme on the warrior.
Dun, dun, dun.
And before we get into our theme of the week, we just want to talk about the 30-day challenge because we're in the final week of the challenge. There's
Dun, dun,
only
dun.
there's only like 9 days left.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's been a whirlwind. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been really good. I've been appreciating it myself, just doing yoga every day. I haven't done that in a couple months, so it's been really nice for me. And it's been nice for my partner and I to do it.
I felt muscles that I haven't felt in months.
Oh, good.
Like, same thing where I'm like, I want to keep with this trend, although I don't know, without being held accountable on Facebook in the group and on Instagram, if that'll happen. We'll see.
Fingers crossed. Or we'll do another challenge. Somebody's like, when's the next one? I was
Already?
like, all right, okay, great.
You're like, great, August?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe September?
Yeah, September, I think we'll do another one.
So we wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of our sponsors that donated some prizes for the raffle at the end of the challenge. There's Supported Soul, Half Moon, Joyful Masks, and Tagulan.
Mm-hmm. And then we also have one of the students who's doing the challenge with us, Megan, has also donated 2 memberships to our site, as well as a couple of malas that I've designed with Divine East. So it's really been a community effort. And what's also really cool is Supported Soul is doing the challenge with us.
Okay.
And I think a couple of people from Half Moon have also been doing it. So
all in it together.
Yeah, our biggest vision of this 30-day challenge was to build community, and we reached out to people in our community, these sponsors themselves, who are local, to kind of build and share with each other. And so I feel like it's been very effective. Our goal has been met, which has been really great.
Yeah, and all of the supporting companies have provided discount codes through the Practice with Clara website under the 30 days challenge page on the event page that are going to be live till the end of the challenge.
Exactly.
I'd say.
Yeah, so about 15 to 20% off of all their amazing products.
Yeah.
And so you'll see the discount codes are literally underneath our partnerships write-ups.
And really cool yoga mats, props, blocks. Joyful masks are colorful face masks to support for COVID. They're really, really pretty.
Yeah, we just actually got ours in the mail today.
Oh.
They're beautiful. We're so excited.
What color are yours?
We got the Hawaiian ones. So there's pineapples and palm trees. And
Oh, you should have worn it.
I know. Well, it literally just came in the mail. We'll take a picture and post it.
Cool.
Yeah. So thank you, Joy. We're excited about those.
Yeah, thank you everyone who's donated something. And so the raffle at the end of the challenge, everyone who's completed the 30 days will be invited to enter the raffle.
Yeah, and so how we'll do that is we'll be sending out a survey on Monday of next week. And so fill out that survey, and then your name will be entered in the raffle, and we'll do the raffle on Tuesday afternoon Pacific Standard Time on IG Live. So you can either check it out there, or we'll just be emailing you if you're asleep or in different time zones, since we do have people all over in different time zones doing this challenge.
And what a great theme to end the challenge on, warrior. Powerful way to close.
Yes, one of my favorite themes. I would say myself.
What I thought we would talk about is one of Clara's favorite books.
The Bhagavad Gita.
Every intensive training, everything I've done with you, I'm pretty sure the Bhagavad Gita comes up.
Always.
Yeah.
Always. So just a little bit of a backstory of the Bhagavad Gita, if you haven't read it yet, I'll say, is it's a conversation essentially between Arjuna, who is a warrior, and he's standing on a battlefield about to go into battle with his extended family. And he's talking to Krishna, who is his charioteer, his advisor, and also happens to be God himself, or a variation of God. And so the whole entire book is a conversation between the two of them about whether or not he should fight and why he should fight. And really, it's a metaphor for whenever we're standing on the precipice of a very hard decision that we need to make. Right, that questioning that we go through essentially is this conversation. And so essentially Krishna is giving Arjuna advice, and what he does is he gives the same advice but in different ways. And so essentially it's a toolbox or a toolkit on how to deal with intense moral decisions.
And persevere through difficult times is one of the main lessons that I gathered from this short yet epic story. It's pretty short. The whole thing takes place on the battlefield, as you mentioned, but it's this the courage of the warrior that needs to come through and persevering through something that is difficult. And not to compare the Bhagavad Gita to the challenge, but I'm sure some people hit a wall in the 30 days. I know I certainly did. And sticking with it no matter what arises.
Yes, and then building on that, so a little backstory is that Arjuna is a warrior. So what he does for work, or what his dharma is in life, is action as karma, is being a warrior. So it's not like this is something new for him. It's something that he's been doing his whole life. However, he's never had to fight his extended family. And so knowing that you're good at something, or that you are meant to do, yeah, right, you're meant to do your dharma, there are points in time where that comes into question, which it should. Like, I feel like that's when my father would say, like, that's when another layer of the practice begins, is when we are in a place of discomfort, right? And then trying to figure out, or learning how to continue to stick with what needs to get done, even though there's discomfort.
And that's a discipline. And I feel like that's one of the things I was reminded of in the last 30 days in coming to my yoga mat, because I neglected it once COVID hit. I feel like I'm not alone in saying that even as a teacher, I just wasn't practicing as much. But having the discipline to show up, and it meant a lot having the supported community, having people that were holding me accountable. And that's part of, but as a warrior, he's alone. So it's interesting the difference in, like, I'm speaking to the community support, but Arjuna on the battlefield, he's alone having this conversation. So there is nobody holding him accountable or supporting him. And
who's holding him accountable is his charioteer, and he chose him. So one of the other parts of this backstory of because essentially the story starts on the battlefield, but the backstory, because the Bhagavad Gita is part of a larger story called the Mahabharata, which is like a very epic, 3,000 page story. This is like a part of it that stands alone and is also a chapter in this book, is that Arjuna had the option to either have Krishna as his advisor, or to have Krishna's army, which is like 10 million men. I'm making the number up, but it's a lot of men. So he either had the option, he got to choose between having Krishna as an advisor, but not being able to use any of his quote unquote special powers, or having his army, and he chose Krishna.
But do they realize that Krishna is God?
Yes.
So they know right from the very
so
beginning.
Arjuna's been, so Krishna essentially is an avatar. I was like, what's the word I'm looking for? Krishna is an avatar for Vishnu, and Vishnu is in the Hindu pantheon. Vishnu is the sustainer, and so the backstory with Vishnu is that Vishnu essentially sustains life, and how he does that is every time humankind is having a fall, or having a time of doubt, an avatar of Vishnu comes out into the human world, is born into the human world, and essentially leads the people back to their faith. And so they say the examples of Vishnu are Krishna, they say Buddha, they say Jesus, they say Muhammad, they say all the great prophets are avatars of Vishnu, because he is the one that essentially motivates people to continue on. So that being said, Krishna has been in Arjuna's life the whole time, and he's essentially been like, Krishna is his guru, is his teacher, and so Arjuna's been with him since he was a very little kid, has been studying with him, knows who he is, and so he essentially, him and the person that is the colonel of the other side, the two of them went to Krishna to ask for help, and Krishna said, you have one of two options. You can have me as a charioteer, or you can have my army. And because Arjuna was the younger of the two, he got to choose first, and he said, no doubt about it, I want you, Krishna, I don't want your army. And so he knows exactly who he is, And as I feel like we're getting there, the idea of this story, and Steph is kind of bringing it up, is that it's a conversation that we have with ourselves. So it's essentially the part of us that has fear that talks to the wisdom part of us, right? And in yoga philosophy, we call this little s self, and that is the ego, who we think we are, and that's where our fear and such survival, fear of survival arises. And then big S self is consciousness, or the greater wisdom that lives inside of us.
But he's not just afraid for himself in death. You mentioned it earlier in the moral dilemma, because he's going to battle all of his teachers, all the people he grew up with, and the other side of his family. So maybe share a little bit in how he got to that point.
Yes. So the story goes is that there were two kings, and they were brothers. And one of them, who is Arjuna's father, wasn't able to, him and his wife were not actually able to conceive. And because they were good people, God gave them 5 sons. Okay, and these sons are sons of the divine. And then his brother, the king's brother, had 100 sons. Oh, he had 99 sons. Sorry, 99 sons. So already there's a stark contrast between the two. Now, the 5 sons, everybody loved them because they were kind of touched. They were touched with the divine. So everybody loved them, and with that, their cousins were really jealous of how everybody appreciated them, and how Arjuna's family really thrived as kingdoms. Like their people really loved them. They were like beloved. And then the father dies. And when the father dies, traditionally in India, the family goes to live with a sibling. So that Arjuna's whole family, his mother and his brothers, they all go live with their cousin and their uncle. Uncle dies, and then the head of the 99 brothers, he becomes the head of the kingdom. And he is not into having his cousins be in his kingdom because he feels threatened by them, essentially. Mm-hmm. So one of Arjuna's brothers loves to gamble. And so what the other cousin does is he figures it out with one of his other uncles that they're going to play a game of dice with Arjuna's brother, but they're going to set it up so that he loses. And because he's addicted to gambling, by the end of the game, he's gambled everything away, including his wife and his kingdoms, everything. So after he's lost everything, Arjuna's family with this brother all the agreement that they have is they have to go live in the forest for 12 years. And if they're spotted anywhere in the forest, then they're going to have to go back to the forest and live there for another 12 years. Then in the 13th year, they have to come into one of the villages in the kingdom. And if they're seen in one of the villages, back to the forest they go. And so they go and they do their penance of 12 years, and then they go and live for a year in a village. And because they're beloved, everybody hides them. So actually the cousins never see them. And so Arjuna and his family come back 13 years later, and they're like, okay, we want our kingdoms back. And his cousin says no. And so at this point, because they won't have any kingdoms, their whole family will die because they have nothing to support themselves, no livelihood. So the reason why we've come to the battlefield is Arjuna is fighting for his family, and specifically his nuclear family, like his brothers and their wives and their children and his mother. And so he is fighting his cousin, the 98 other brothers, right? Their army. But the interesting part, and Steph, you brought this up earlier, is that traditionally, whatever village you live in India, you have to fight for that village. So all of their friends and teachers that they grew up with, that Arjuna grew up with, is also on the opposite side of the battlefield. So that's where he's having the dilemma. Is like he has no problem killing people. Like violence is a part of his life. But killing people whom he has loved and grown up with is the hardest part. So his dilemma is, do I fight these people and watch all the bloodshed, or if I don't fight all these people, then I am essentially allowing my family to die. So what do I do around this? Right? So stakes are high.
And one of the things you're reminding me of that I love about this tale is the contrast in light and dark. And it really shows all of the aspects of being human. like the darker side, the lighter side, and the choices that we're faced with day to day, where we have to accept those pieces of ourselves and society and move forward. There's no avoiding it. And I feel like this story really captures that.
And in the same breath is how many shades of gray there are, right?
Yeah.
Because even though Arjuna's brothers are these, they've been essentially, quote unquote, touched by God, like they still have flaws, right? They essentially...
Well, the gambling.
Yeah, exactly.
The addict. Totally.
Yeah, so it's like they're all human here as we are. And so with that is like, can we... There's the light that we can usually accept about ourselves, and the darkness that we try to kind of muffle or oppress, right, or suppress. And then there's also all this gray.
Yeah, because you sang Arjuna, touched by God, the goodness, the compassion, the kindness, but also violence is a huge piece of his dharma.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the biggest conversations that yogis have, because this is a book that yogis usually read, we read that and the Yoga Sutras is like kind of the two standard books that most yogis read. And so the question that always starts every conversation when we do the Bhagavad Gita is, why are we reading a book about violence if one of our yamas, one of the things that we try to practice as yogis in the world is ahimsa, which is nonviolence? Why are we reading a book about war? And so it's a great question. It's the question I always start the discussion with is like, should we be like, so the first question I always ask is, if you were Arjuna, would you fight your cousins, right? Why or why not? And again, it's this, they've set the stage so that the stakes are so high that you have to do something. Like you can't do nothing, right?
Yeah, and one of my teachers spoke, we were talking about anger one day, and she was speaking to righteous anger, how anger is mobilizing. And you've talked about it as well, how anger is sharp, there's intelligence, and it's motivating. Mm-hmm. So the same thing in terms of violence, where sometimes we need to act in discord with ahimsa. And there is a way to be angry and to be violent, I think, when you're standing up for yourself, or when you're standing up for a collective, or if you even look at what's going on with the civil rights movement in the U.S., right, where there is a type of anger and defense that is necessary all over the world right now for people to rise and bring that forward.
And sometimes we have to shed a little bit of blood to get a little bit of peace.
Yeah.
But do we, right? That's the question. It's like such a hard one. And it's a good one to chew on, again, as yogis. And this is like, comes along the conversation like you're talking about in terms of Black Lives Matters and what's happening right now currently in the US as well as around the world. And also like another big conversation is like being vegetarian versus not being vegetarian. And like, are we honoring, these other sentient beings who don't speak our language? So it's such a great... And at least for me, I don't think there's any right, there's no one point blank answer. I feel like it is a very personal, it's a personal dilemma that you need to kind of chew with in terms of what you want to do. And I feel like this is what Krishna is doing, or this is how Krishna is kind of talking throughout the book, is he shows different ways of getting to the same result, but doing it, the path being different.
Yeah, and you're reminding me, I was listening to a interview with Mary Oliver, and she's talking about her poetry, and she gets some really deep messages across in writing that it's elegant, and there's lots of imagery, and it's pretty positive. And in this interview, I'm going to paraphrase, but she mentions something in terms of not wanting to spread more of the ugliness or the anger that is out there. That's not her tactic. She wants to illuminate the positive things. And she's speaking specifically of nature and environmentalism. So she's not talking about these are the things we should be doing. She's just trying to highlight these are all the magnificent things in nature that we should celebrate and want to be around more. So again...
And take care of.
And take care of. But there's lots of poets who I like that have a more active voice in maybe prescribing a little bit and what needs to shift. So it's just it just depends on the approach that you want to take and how you want to appear in the world, which ties into the dharma that Arjuna has as a warrior.
Mm-hmm. And so the question I ask you is, would you fight? Why or why not?
I would, and that ties in with the theme that I wanted to bring up in Action for Action's Sake. And there's a passage in here where Krishna is saying, what happens is going to happen either way. And it also brings in the idea of fate. And this is going to happen, the fight's going to happen. Whether or not you decide to go and raise your sword doesn't matter, because it's happening with or without you. And I feel like that's a little bit of what we're being swept up in right now globally. And these things are happening. You can choose to
Be active
yeah,
or not.
yeah,
But by being inactive, you are still choosing.
yes,
You're choosing a side,
Yeah.
right? And Krishna says the same thing in this book. Like, even if you don't do it, your decision of not doing it, right,
Yeah.
is also creating an impact. So what kind of impact do you want to create?
Yeah.
And so the quote that you're saying is action for action's sake, not to bear the fruit of one's actions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so that's one of the biggest quotes in this book, action for action's sake, not to bear the fruit of one's actions. And the idea of that is you do it to get it done. You don't do it for the result, okay? Because especially, like, let's just talk about in terms of what's currently happening. Like, the skeptics would say, like, okay, you stand up, you raise your voice, right? But does it go on unheard ears? Like, what's the point of even rising to this? Like, can we even make a difference? And so what Krishna would say to that is that it doesn't matter whether or not it makes a difference. You need to do it, because that's what needs to get done. Right. And so part of this is like pulling or going into yourself and kind of checking in, like, what is my truth? Like, what is it that I truly believe in? And then with that, can I stand up and speak it? Right. And I feel like that sometimes can be the hardest part. It's so interesting that we're talking about the Gita with everything that's happening in the world right now, because it's kind of perfect.
I was
Whoa.
thinking that this morning with the
Yeah.
end of the challenge and all the things. I was like, the timing could not be better.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is that the idea of the warrior is that it lives in each and every one of us, that it's an archetype. It is a part of an aspect of all of us that we need to call upon when we need courage, when we need strength, when we need to kind of speak or be our integrity or our truth. Right. And so it's easy to do that when things are easy, but when it's a challenge, that's when we have to call upon the warrior.
And how would you go about discovering your truth? Like, unpack what that is.
Great question. So I can't remember when we spoke about this, but there's a difference between the truth and our truth. Right? The truth and our truth. Oh, we wrote about it. That's what it was.
I'm like, we haven't talked about this yet.
Okay, great. Yeah, we wrote about it. We wrote about it in one of our blogs. So the truth is something that we can all agree that's happening. Like, the truth is right now that outside in Vancouver, it's cloudy. Okay. And that's a fact kind of truth. And then our truth is the one that lives inside of us. And that one generally is a bit grayer. It's not black or white. It has different textures to it. And so I find it's in those moments of quiet that I can hear my truth. And so my truth being what I need to do or what I believe in right now. And I find that it is through the practice of meditation or yoga or contemplation that I create the space in order to hear that truth. And at least for me, and I'd like you to answer the question as well, is that especially if I don't want to hear that truth, I become very, very busy. Like, oh, I have so much I need to do today. Like, my to-do list is ginormous and I have all these things and I don't have time to think about or contemplate or figure out what it is or my opinion about what this is. I have, X, Y, and Z that needs to get done. And generally, if I don't take care of that, if I don't make the space for that truth, then it comes out in uglier ways. And so an example I'm thinking of right now in my own life is that there was a point in time where I was not speaking my truth to a dear friend of mine. And I got so angry at him for absolutely no reason. But it was like kind of culminating. We'd been living together in Turkey for a while and working together on this project. And I wasn't speaking my truth to him because I didn't really want to deal with the confrontation of it. And it bubbled up one night where all of a sudden I was like screaming about nothing. Like, and I realized, like, he was just kind of sitting there like shell shocked, and I realized, I was like, oh, I haven't been connecting to what I really need to get done, or what I really need to tell you right now. And the next morning, after apologizing profusely for the intensity the night before, is after all of that noise, I was forced to be quiet because there was nothing else I could do, and to hear like I wasn't sharing what I needed to share. And as soon as I did, the weight was lifted off of my shoulders and the space between us was cleared. I mean, it wasn't like a 2-minute situation. Yeah. It took 45 minutes to about an hour for us to like weave through that together. But yeah, so I find that, so I feel a great indicator of what I learned from that situation is a great indicator for me is when all of a sudden I'm feeling very intense emotion. Generally it's anger. It's because it's arising because I haven't been listening.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it's like, it's like turning in me at a much more intense rate to be like, hello, dee, pay attention, right? And for other people, it will show up as dis-ease in their body, right? Where people will get injuries, or they'll get like an autoimmune something, or, like they'll get sick in some really intense way that's debilitating to tell them like, stop and pay attention. Yeah. For me, I find, at least thus far in my life, it generally shows up as very intense anger or rage. And that now when I see that bubbling up, I'm like, okay, Clara needs to pull back a little bit and take a little look-see in the underneath the trunk here and try to figure out what's going on, because I haven't been paying attention because I've been keeping myself so busy with all these other things. So turning it to you, right? Like how is it that you connect to your own truth?
I know I'm misaligned when I'm uncomfortable or there's fear. I start getting really anxious, unsettled, and weird things will start happening. I do think when I broke my wrist that was a clear indicator that I needed to just stop everything. So I usually get really uncomfortable, and I get stuck in a loop. And usually what I need to do to clear is something movement of some sort. So yoga, going for a long walk. Usually if I can get outside and just walk and kind of things start appearing just in the quiet, and all of a sudden I'll have that recognition. And then it's like I either feel it and I know what I need to do, or there's more fear and then I need to chew on that. Mm-hmm. So your initial emotion sounds like anger. Mine is fear. Mm-hmm. And I start questioning everything. And the last couple weeks, I was really nervous about appearing on social media, just in how I wanted to voice my opinion and how I felt with what's going on in the States. And then you add the layers of COVID, and it just feels like a lot right now. And I get uncomfortable, and then I don't. It's the non-action that you're saying, where Arjuna is on the field and they're having this conversation, and that's kind of where I was, you
freeze.
Yeah, I take a hot minute and just, you don't need to do anything immediately.
Yes.
That's the other big lesson that I've come to within the last couple of years, is you don't need to act immediately, but you do need to do something.
Yes. So
I thought I'd read one of my favorite passages from the Bhagavad Gita, and then Clara and I could talk about it.
Great.
Yeah.
We love that.
The Blessed Lord said...
The Blessed Lord being Krishna.
Krishna, thank you.
Great.
I am death, shatterer of worlds, annihilating all things. With or without you, these warriors and their facing armies will die. Therefore, stand up, win glory, conquer the enemy, rule. Already I have struck them down. You are just my instrument, Arjuna.
Okay, read it again, please.
I am death, shatterer of worlds, annihilating all things. With or without you, these warriors and their facing armies will die. Therefore, stand up, win glory, conquer the enemy, rule. Already I have struck them down. You are just my instrument, Arjuna.
All right, talk about it. Why do you like it?
I like it for its presence in how powerful this statement is, and absolute. Like, he is definitely taking a stand and calling out the other side as evil, which shows dualism. And Krishna's God, so when I think of God, I think of lightness, compassion, acceptance of all things. But he is very clearly saying, like, get up, stand up, conquer the enemy. Like, he's calling out the other side, which is something I love in all the Hindu deities, and that they fully express the light and the dark. I mentioned that earlier. And in how it's all eventual, is I've struck them down. You were just my instrument. So again, like we said before, this is happening with or without your participation. Mm-hmm. And you're my instrument. So in that statement, you're a part of the divine. You're an instrument of the divine. So the divine is in you. That's how I see it, is he's saying, Arjuna, you're part of me, you're part of this, we're all part of this. But then again, it's complex because he's calling out the other side as the enemy.
Is he? When does he say the enemy? Oh, yeah,
conquer the enemy.
Yes.
So there's a tension there where he's saying, like, we're going to go kill people. So again, in contrast to ahimsa, the precepts of the yoga practice. But then he's also including Arjuna as being his instrument of the divine. And I wouldn't see a god as being that absolute in his statement of, we're going to war. So I love it. I love the power. I am death, shatterer of worlds. Like, who starts a sentence like that? Krishna.
Yeah. Hello.
I'm going out like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the shatterer of worlds.
Annihilating all things. Yeah.
Yeah, I got nothing. I mean, it's just, I feel like microphone drop, really.
Yeah.
On that one. I think that this is like we're chapter 11 of the book, and I think there's only 16 chapters, maybe 18 total. So we're near the end. So at this point, Krishna has already tried getting Arjuna to fight like 6 to 8 different ways, and they haven't worked. So now he's going head first. Yeah, he's going. I was gonna say tough love. He's going tough love. Like, just get in there and you got to do this because this is what needs to get done, and you are, but an instrument in my doing.
And this reminds me of Durga or Kali, the female deities that you always speak to. You say, Durga's my homegirl. Those are your words.
Yeah, the warrior. She's the warrior goddess.
Yeah, who cuts through all the bullshit.
Yes.
Because sometimes you need that heavy hand.
Yeah. The crazy part about this is that Arjuna loses. Like, he goes into battle and he loses.
Yeah.
So that's also an interesting part, is like, they don't talk about it in the book because the book ends with them going into war, but you don't find out, at least in the Bhagavad Gita. But he does all this, and it's to what end? Like, he ends up getting ruined. Like, they don't win. So Krishna is trying to get him to go in there, but it's interesting because Krishna knows what's going to happen because he is God. He knows what happens next. But it still needs to get done. So it's an interesting, so sometimes we do things, right? Here's the action for action's sake, instead of the fruit of one's actions is that, like, he doesn't win this one, but he still needs to do it. And so, again, what I think is so interesting is sometimes we need to do things and it's not going to benefit us in the long term, right? But it needs to get done in order for the next chapter, or in order for us to learn what we need to learn, or what have you. So I find that very fascinating part of the book, just because he's like, really, the whole book, he's like, Krishna is like, come on, Arjuna, like, put your big boy pants on and get out there and fight, with knowing full well that Arjuna's not going to win.
But doesn't that go back to what you were saying about big S self versus little s self, in that Arjuna is not fighting for himself? Like, it's not about you, Arjuna, just like what we're in right now. It really isn't about any singular person. It's about the greater good, or the bigger truth, or whatever the collective needs to listen to and learn.
There needs to be a big change.
Yeah. So one person sacrificed in the bigger narrative. I think for me, that's also how I would read that. And then we know only Arjuna's name. We don't know any of the names of the soldiers who won the war, but we know Arjuna's name. Isn't that what's important?
Well, the idea, we do know. We know the other side's name, but it's not important, which is why I'm not saying it. Because what's important is the fact that we are Arjuna.
Yeah.
And that this is our story. This is our story of a time when we have to make a decision that is going to be uncomfortable and in the long run, again, may not benefit us, but needs to get done. And that is like what I love about this one in particular is how Krishna is trying to get Arjuna to do it is like, bro, you're an instrument in this. Like you are a small piece, like you are a piece of sand on the beach here. You're not the beach itself. I am the beach, yeah. Right? So you just go ahead and be that piece of sand, and let's all be a beach together, right? And so in that way, it's like remembering that, like you just said, it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about the greater good, which again I think relates again to what's happening in terms of Black Lives Matters and kind of the movement, the civil unrest that's happening not only in the States, but I feel like globally, that it's not about one person, it's about creating a very large change.
And also, and you mentioned this briefly before, and I'll bring it up again so we can unpack it a little, in not having attachment to a specific outcome. Because usually our ego is striving for that narrative that we want to control, create, whatever have you, reap reward. And the yoga practice preaches this in do things for the sake of doing it, not for the sake of, speaking of yoga, perfecting a pose or getting into crow or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I'll even speak to it on a larger platform just in terms of the youths in America and the idea of not voting, right? Like there's a large movement of people that don't believe that they should vote because it doesn't make a difference, right? Why even put energy towards something if it's already been pre-decided? It's kind of actually, I would bring it back to this, like if I'm just an instrument in, like if it's already been decided, what's the point of doing it? Right. And I feel like that's another large question that I find that this book, this is one of the reasons I love it, is like, okay, if fate, if it's already planned out, then like, what's the point of even interacting in my story if, the same thing's going to happen regardless of the decision that I make?
See, and we talked about this in the first half of the 300 hour I took with you, or the philosophy portion when your dad was present. It was great. Because you just see everyone kind of get attached to whatever they think fate is. I'm one of them. But I think we have some control over what happens to us. I don't think everything is as clearly mapped out. But what do you think?
I think that there is a natural trajectory that, the biggest thing that I believe in is that it's not personal, that none of this is personal. And so because of that, Clara's life is not like mapped out. Like God didn't be like, okay, Clara, you're going to be having these, 15 things are going to happen in your life. I don't believe it's that personal, but I do believe that when particular energies come together, and the energy of being Clara and the energy of being Stephanie and the energy of Clara and Stephanie together, or, like relationships in general, right? Like when energies come together and kind of create a particular kind of friction, then that friction creates a particular trajectory.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think of it more along the lines of that than I think of like Clara making a decision. But like if I'm moving in if I'm propelling myself in a particular direction, depending on how much energy I put in that direction, I'll move in that direction. But do I believe that like my whole life has been planned out? No, I don't believe that. And in the same breath, I believe that, like wherever there is a reaction, wherever there's an action, there's a reaction, right? Like there's a cause and effect. I believe in that. But I don't believe that it's like a personality thing. Does that mean, I don't know if that really made sense.
No, it does. And it's simple. I like your, the concept of energies interacting with each other, because that is some element of choice that we have in our relationships, is do I pursue this and continue down this path depending on whatever's coming out of it, how I feel, versus do I step away?
And whatever you do or don't do creates a particular, like, let's say formula. And with that formula, if you were able to look at it, you'd be able to see mathematically the trajectory it would go on.
Yeah.
So But I don't believe that it's mapped out like you're born and it was like, this person is born to do this. Like, I don't know if I don't.
So do you read your daily horoscope?
No, but I love horoscopes.
So do I.
I'll read them, but just because it's interesting, because you'll always interpret what you want out of those.
Yeah.
Like, it's the same with tarot cards. I feel like I read tarot cards all the time, but like, I don't necessarily believe like God is speaking to me through them, but I'll pick up whatever I need to pick up in order to move in the trajectory that I'm moving in.
And get a little positive insight is sometimes what I like about tarot or horoscope.
Yeah, but sometimes it's negative. Sometimes you're like, oh, this is kind of intense.
But sometimes it's what you needed
Totally.
to read.
100%. 100%. And so, but coming back to the instrument that Arjuna is the instrument for Krishna, I think one of the greatest lessons to ponder here is like, how much of an instrument are you going to be for change? Right? Because that's essentially what is happening right now, actually, in the world, and what is happening with the Bhagavad Gita is that Arjuna needs to be the instrument of change because his cousins, right, have been bullying his nuclear family as well as their kingdoms for a long time. So he needs to be the change to propel the kingdoms forward in order to create change.
See, and that's something that, because of his position in society and within his family and the kingdoms, he plays a really pivotal role in the shaping of this story, whereas someone from the village doesn't, just based on where they're born and who they are. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
So it depends, an instrument of change depends on where you're born, which we have no control over.
Yes. Brings up an interesting story that my dad, or an experiment that my dad told me about, and I'm definitely going to be paraphrasing on this, but they were trying to figure out, like, on a children's playground, there's kind of an energy that's moving. There's an energy that's kind of propelling everybody, or kind of creating a certain kind of vibe in the playground. Mm-hmm. Okay, vibe is not the right word. I'm gonna go more scientific. There's like an actual there's like a rhythm of energy, like actually how the atoms are moving in this playground. Okay, mm-hmm. And they were trying to figure out who is creating that rhythm. Right? Is it the alpha child that's kind of like the kids are playing with? Who is it? And what they realized, it was a child that is playing by themselves and tapping the side of the sandbox. And by tapping the side of the sandbox, it is literally vibrating and creating a particular energy in the field around it.
Interesting.
So the lesson of that is sometimes it's the quiet one that you don't really recognize that creates the change versus the one that's being the loudest.
And I think that is also dependent on what your gift is. Like, if you're a really great presenter, speaker, that's your gift. That's how you're going to become an instrument. Whereas if you're a painter, you're really good visually, maybe that's how you're expressing whatever it is that needs to come out.
But before you go into that, let's go back to the statement you made before that was interesting, is like, where were you born? Mm-hmm. And that'll definitely affect your trajectory. And then also, that being said, there are what we call indigo children, or children, like gifted beings who come, who kind of come out of nowhere, and they create large change. Right?
Do you, off the top of your head, can you think of anyone who you think might have been an indigo child?
No.
Okay.
You?
No. I read a book a couple weeks ago that they talked about collecting all the indigo children and going into hiding in a cave. So it's funny that you brought that. Yeah, it's funny that you brought that up, because I'm like, I literally just read something about the indigo children.
Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit more about what you read in terms of what is an indigo child?
So they're children who have access. I kind of was thinking about the X-Men, because they have special gifts where they hear voices, or they're telepathic, and they can communicate and have gifts that transcend our human capabilities. And they can remember things from the past that are not theirs. So they can channel, in this narrative, the energies that were kept being recreated. They were reincarnated as Socrates and Plato, and all these different manifestations throughout history, Cleopatra. So then as they came back again, they could recall those memories, and then their actions in the world, they could expedite the changes and things happening, because they're like, I've been here, I've done this.
So I can think of two.
Okay.
Amma, the hugging guru in India, they said that she awakened when she was 8.
Wow.
and that she has many gifts, which is why she has one of the largest followings. She hugs between 6,000 and 8,000 people a day. She's got ashrams all over India, as well as churches, or not churches, definitely not churches, hospitals and schools for kids. So she is a very big transformer of change in India. And then the other person I can think of is the Dalai Lama, because the interesting about the Tibetans, right, is that they believe that all the lamas keep being reincarnated. Yep. So when they die, they actually go all over Tibet with some of the lamas,
yes.
his hat and
they they're like, those are my glasses. Sorry, finish that so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So I just needed a minute to kind of think about that. So in Tibetans really believe in reincarnation, so they're constantly looking for their teachers. So when their teacher dies, they kind of scour Tibet for young kids who were born around the same time that their teachers died, and then bring pieces like their cane or their mala beads, and they place them in front of the children to see whether or not they recognize them. So yes, there we go. I can think of two from the East, and I'm sure there's a lot more in the West that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, that's cool. I read when I was in India a passage on a wall, and it was the child who was 6, I forget what year it was from, but pointed at the glasses and were like, those are my glasses, and that's how they knew that it was the Dalai Lama come back.
Yeah, but it'll be other lamas as well, not just the Dalai Lama, but other lamas as well.
Yeah.
It'll be but the Dalai Lama specifically, they say that he keeps being reincarnated, so they're always looking for him. So they've had Indigo Children apparently in Tibet for a long time.
That's so cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, one more passage.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So this one's a little bit longer.
Okay, and I'm just going to jump in and say that what Steph is reading from is the Bhagavad Gita, the Stephen Mitchell translation, which is the one that I really recommend for people who are newer to reading the Bhagavad Gita. I would recommend the Stephen Mitchell version because it's very poetic. The other ones can be a bit dry, and I'm not afraid of dry, but I feel like when you're first starting something out, it's nice if it's a bit juicier, a little bit more palatable. So I would recommend reading the Stephen Mitchell one, and then if you get into it, then there's a couple other versions that maybe we'll put in the write-up that I would recommend for people to read.
This one's great. I've read this dozens of times in the years I've owned it.
It's beautiful.
And I just the reason this passage I chose it is because reading it to prep for our talk, it stuck out for me. I'd never chewed on this piece before. I was
like, I'm excited.
Yeah. So this is Krishna, the Blessed Lord said, "The vision that you have been granted is difficult to attain. Even the gods are always longing to behold me like this. Not by study or rites or aims or aesthetic practice can I be seen in this cosmic form, as you have just seen me. Only by single-minded devotion can I be known as I truly am, Arjuna. Can I be seen and entered."
Okay, so let's give context to what you just read first. So, is it the Great Revelation is chapter 12?
I think so.
Oh, it's 11, yeah. It's chapter 11.
Oh,
you can see by up here. So the Great Revelation is one of the chapters in the Gita, and essentially what happens at the beginning of this chapter is Arjuna says to Krishna, I want to see you in your cosmic form. Like, I see you in your human form, but you talk about, all these things that you are, but all I see is this human person in front of me. So what does this mean? So Krishna says, okay, I'm going to show you my cosmic form. So he shows him his cosmic form. And how I think about it is doing 15 hits of LSD, and then all of a sudden you're seeing things, because what he has seen literally floors him in a way that because he sees life, he sees death, he sees everything in between, he sees the interconnectedness of all things, right? It's kind of another way I think about it is tapping into the matrix and seeing the matrix itself, right? It's something that you can't understand, and it's kind of overwhelming. So that has just happened, and then Krishna comes back into his human form, and then I'll get Steph to read it one more time, just so now that you have the context. Here we go.
"The vision that you have just been granted is difficult to attain. Even the gods are always longing to behold me like this. Not by study or rites or aims or aesthetic practice can I be seen in this cosmic form, as you have just seen me. Only by single-minded devotion can I be known as I truly am, Arjuna. Can I be seen and entered."
Okay, and so why did you tell us about why you chose this?
For the essence of devotion. So Krishna is saying, you can see me because I can see the pureness of your devotion. in your heart. No one else has seen me in my divine form, not those who are so dedicated to the practice, ascetic, everything else.
Yes.
It's the devotion that brings Krishna into his divine form. The devotion of Arjuna that brings Krishna into the divine form.
Okay. And so why is that interesting?
Because I was like this, where I would get hung up on studying enough or knowing enough or reading enough. And I'll even speak to the last week in voicing how I felt around what's going on in the US and in the world with the Black Lives Matter movement. I didn't feel like I had the right words or enough knowledge to speak to it in a way that was compassionate and supportive, when of course I can. But for a week I sat in my own discomfort and felt a lot of things, and then realized that what I am is enough. Having compassion and support is enough. And I still read and researched and reached out to voices and listened, but just being devoted and trusting in that and having faith that your love is enough.
And so you feel like Krishna is saying that Arjuna's love is enough?
I feel like he's saying that your devotion, he felt that Arjuna was devoted, that his heart was pure, that there was no, he was focusing on the bigger S self, that
that Arjuna was.
Yeah, that Arjuna was not wrapped up in his own ego or small singular narrative.
Okay.
That his devotion was pure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that nobody else's devotion is as pure.
Well, he's saying, no one's seen me like this but you. Again, that's a pretty bold statement. No gods have seen me like this, only you. And I've read this many times, but this morning I was like, whoa, how did I miss that for like 5 years? It's interesting.
Yeah, he's the ultimate student.
So he's a student. So his devotion is pure because he worshipped Krishna as a teacher.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, worship Krishna in all ways, but in the human form, he was a student.
So this is why I wanted to talk to you about it. I'm like, I wonder what Clara has to say. So it's more than just being purely devoted. It's about taking on a teacher.
No. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that, like, as a student of mine, as a devotee of mine, you've always been there, right? And like, I feel like the ultimate test was when Duryodhana and Arjuna, so the other side, the other colonel, his cousin, essentially, when the two of them show up at Krishna's house, Krishna asks them, "What do you want? Do you want an army or do you want me?"
Got you.
And Arjuna said, like, without even flinching,
I want you.
You.
Yeah.
Always you. You until the end, right? It's you and me and you. And so that is, I think part of the ultimate test that he won, because he's like, there's nobody else but you for me. And so I think that is a sign of pure devotion, and kind of pulling back a little bit in terms of the other large theme in the Bhagavad Gita is this idea of devoting yourself to something. It's like Bhakti, which is devotion in Sanskrit, this idea that everything you should do from a pure place in your heart, right, as an act of devotion, meaning as an act of an offering to something that is greater, something that is outside of yourself. Krishna says at another point in time to Arjuna, like, those who study, right, or do good deeds, right, they are not as pure of heart as those who do it from a place of devotion, right? Devotion is the ultimate, like, if you want the ultimate test, or not ultimate test, but the ultimate way of showing your love is through devotion. And what a beautiful, and the idea of that is devotion is this idea of surrender, right? Of this idea of letting go of, like, and this is where the person who we think we are let go to the greater, like, this is the little s self melding into the big S self, meaning the who I think I am melts into consciousness or divinity, whatever word you want to put in there, like God, whatever it is for you, right? It's surrendering and softening into, like, being the piece of sand on the beach, right?
Yeah.
And that realizing that you are not the beach, you are just a piece of sand in something that is much, much greater than you.
Which is why you act for action's sake and not based on the end goal.
Yes.
Yeah, and all ties
Yeah,
back in.
and part of that, also building on that, is that through the surrender, we let go of our suffering, because really the ultimate goal of most practices, let's say Eastern thought practices, are, right, is this letting go of suffering, of no longer having this pain, or not, we'll always have pain, but suffering, right? And so how we let go of suffering is we surrender, and we surrender to all of it. We let it go so that we're not holding on, right? In Buddhist terms, we call that attachment, right? We become unattached because we're not holding on for dear life, right? We're not, the way that another teacher likes to describe it, is like life is like a flowing river, right? And attachments are what hold us to the bank of the river. But what we need to do is let go and go with the river. And so the river is, right, the momentum that is the energy that is divinity, blah, 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 whatever you want to call it on that, right? But letting go of the smaller things that attach, that create suffering is, like, is the embankment of the river.
And the ideas of yourself, or what the world is. That's the attachment.
One of the attachments. Like your family can be attachment, money can be an attachment, right? Like the end goal, right? People who are very goal driven, and goals are a good thing to have, but also being open to how you get there, or what the goal ends up being, or how it moves, right? It's good to have a trajectory of where you want to go, and then being open to the process of how you get there, right? And that creates enlightenment or freedom. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go. And they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include vinyasa, slow flow, hatha, restorative, yin, mantra, meditation. I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more. Or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.